The submersible ROV, a dull yellow beetle of industrial steel, descended into the black water of Titan II missile silo 571-7. Its sonar painted a ghost image of the world below, a chaotic junkyard of collapsed gantries and rusted infrastructure submerged for 15 years under stagnant desert runoff. Then, at a depth of 140 feet, the operator registered an anomaly, a clean, rectangular shape wedged beneath a twisted rib of steel. The machine's manipulator arm, with surgical slowness, cleared away the debris. It was a waterproof pelican case. Nearby, tangled in wiring and silt, lay the skeletal remains of a man. At that moment, in the summer of 2019, the case of Ellis, the architectural historian who vanished without a trace in July of 2004, was officially reopened. July 10, 2004, began like any other for Ellis. He was 28, a doctoral candidate at the University of Arizona, and by all accounts, a man consumed by a singular passion, the concrete ghosts of the Cold War. His thesis was set to be a definitive work on the architecture of deterrence, and he pursued it with a scholar's precision, not a thrill-seeker's recklessness. His colleagues knew him as meticulous, a researcher who triple-checked his equipment and left detailed itineraries before every exploration. He wasn't just an urban explorer, he was a historian descending into the past. That morning, he told his girlfriend he was heading out to the 571-7 complex near Tucson. It was the last of 9 Titan II silos in the state he had yet to document. He spoke of it with academic reverence, describing the unique challenges of its partially flooded state and the specific beryllium-copper alloys used in its construction, materials he wanted to photograph for a chapter on Cold War-era engineering. He saw history in the metal, a story of technology and fear. His final email was sent at 8:05 a.m. to his thesis advisor. The subject line read, "Into the belly of the beast." In the body, he outlined his plan for the day, a methodical descent into the upper levels to photograph the launch control center before assessing the water level in the main shaft. He noted his intention to be back in cell range by sundown, promising to send a preliminary report. Witnesses saw his old Toyota pickup parked on a dirt service road near the silo entrance around mid-morning. The Arizona sun beat down on the unassuming concrete slab that sealed the site, a brutalist tombstone in the middle of the desert. Everything about the scene was normal, quiet. The meticulous researcher was simply beginning another day at the office. His last known communication was a text message to a friend, another explorer, sent at approximately 9:30 a.m. It read, "Going dark. See you on the other side." It was his standard sign-off, a routine bit of jargon for a dangerous profession. But he never came back to the other side. As dusk settled over the Sonoran desert, his phone, left on the passenger seat of his truck, received a reply. "Can't wait to see the photos. Stay safe." The message was delivered. It was never read. Then there was only silence, a silence that would stretch on for 15 years. The recovery operation was slow and methodical. Under the sterile glare of portable floodlights, the team from the Pima County Sheriff's Department worked with the quiet efficiency of archaeologists. The Pelican case, once freed from its 15-year tomb, was treated as a sacred artifact. Silt was brushed away, seals were checked, and the latches were opened with a faint hydraulic hiss. Inside, nestled in its foam cradle, was Ellis's digital camera, its lens still pointed at a darkness that had lasted for over a decade. The memory card, a tiny square of plastic, was extracted. It was the black box of a forgotten flight. Detective Ellen McCartney of the Cold Case Unit watched as the card was slid into a reader. On the screen, the first images appeared, one by one. They were exactly as his professors had described his work. Masterful. Crisp, long exposure shots captured the brutalist geometry of the silo's upper levels, the play of light from his headlamp on decaying concrete, the silent majesty of Cold War machinery. Each photograph was a testament to a man in complete control of his craft and his environment. Then the sequence changed. The last 4 images were different. The composition disintegrates. The focus is soft. The angles are desperate, taken from a low position, pointing upwards. The camera is no longer an instrument of documentation. It is a witness. An eye seeing its last moments. It is the visual record of a man's final frantic seconds. Then came the final frame, image 238. It was a photograph born of pure instinct. Ellis, from the bottom of a dark shaft, had pointed his camera up and fired the flash. The light, traveling upwards, caught a figure standing on a ledge high above. A silhouette. A man. His face is lost in shadow, but his form is clear against the circular opening of the silo. In his hand, he holds a long, heavy tool. A pry bar. The discovery shattered the official narrative of 2004. The photo's timestamp read 10:17 a.m. This proved Ellis had not slipped at the entrance. He had been deep inside the complex for at least an hour. The forensics team now faced a new set of questions that were colder and sharper than any posed 15 years prior. Who was the man on the ledge? Why was he armed with a pry bar in a place no one was supposed to be? And the most chilling question of all, the one that reclassified a 15-year-old missing persons report into an active homicide investigation, was Ellis documenting the silo, or was he documenting his own killer? The scene was no longer an accident. It was a meticulously concealed grave. The 2004 investigation into Ellis's disappearance began with a degree of inevitability and ended in frustration. Pima County Sheriff's deputies located his truck within hours of him being reported missing. His wallet and keys were inside. On the ground, there were no signs of a struggle, no unexplained tire tracks, no evidence of another person ever having been there. The vast Arizona desert, stretching out in every direction, offered no clues. The entire case seemed to begin and end at the heavy concrete cap of Silo 571-7. Search teams meticulously combed the upper levels of the complex, the accessible areas above the floodline. They found nothing. No dropped equipment, no scuff marks indicating a fall, no personal effects. It was as if he had walked to the edge of the silo's main shaft and simply evaporated. The true obstacle, however, was vertical. 146 feet of stagnant, chemical-laced water filled the silo, a murky tomb of tangled steel and silt. The sheriff at the time, facing a dangerous and technically complex recovery, deemed a full-scale dive operation unacceptably hazardous. The risk to the divers, he argued, was too great for what was presumed to be a simple body recovery. His decision was backed by engineering reports that warned of the unstable, submerged debris. Without a body, without a witness, and without any tangible sign of foul play, the investigation hit a wall. A literal wall of concrete and a figurative wall of water. The official theory hardened into accepted fact. Ellis, the expert, had made a novice's mistake. He had likely fallen, his body becoming hopelessly entangled in the wreckage below. The case was never officially closed, but it was relegated to the cold, quiet archives of the Missing Persons Unit. A tragedy, yes, but a self-inflicted one. This was the Wall of Silence. It was not a conspiracy of powerful men, but a structure built from apathy and assumption. The silence of the authorities who accepted the simplest narrative. The silence of the silo itself, which held its secrets in a column of black water. This was a form of complicity, a collective shrug that classified a murder as a mishap and allowed a killer to walk away, confident that the truth was buried under tons of water and the weight of official indifference. Detective McCartney spread the contents of the original 2004 file across a steel table. It was a thin collection of paper, yellowed at the edges, representing a case that had gone cold from its first day. The reports were filled with phrases like "no signs of foul play" and "presumed accidental death." against the stark, high-resolution clarity of image 238. These old papers felt like artifacts from a different, more naive century. The investigation had to start from zero, treating every assumption from the past as a potential blind spot. They began with the living. Ellis's friends, his former girlfriend, his thesis advisor, now all in their mid-40s, their memories softened by 15 years of unresolved grief. Their stories were consistent. They painted a portrait of a young man who was the antithesis of a risk-taker. He was a planner, a documentarian, a man who respected the dangerous history he studied. He would never have descended without his ropes, his former advisor stated, his voice flat with old certainty. Never. It wasn't in his nature. Their testimony didn't provide new leads, but it systematically dismantled the foundation of the original investigation. Next, McCartney's team tracked down members of the small, insular community of urban explorers who had been active in Arizona in the early 2000s. Their interviews were cagey. These were men and women who had spent their youth trespassing on federal property. Their initial fear of legal trouble slowly gave way to faded memories of a different kind of fear. One explorer, now a software engineer in Phoenix, recalled a strange figure who haunted the periphery of their world. He didn't know his name, but he called him the Gatekeeper. A man who worked at the official Titan Missile Museum, someone who was deeply possessive of the decommissioned sites and openly hostile to anyone he deemed an intruder. Simultaneously, another detective was mining a different kind of archive, the primitive internet forums of 2004. On a long-defunct message board called Concrete Tombs, they found posts from Ellis under his username, Archivist AZ. He discussed his research, shared techniques, and asked for advice on the flooded 571-7 silo. Then, in a thread from May of that year, 2 months before Ellis disappeared, they found it. A series of aggressive, paranoid posts from a user named Silo Warden. He railed against the academic vultures and disrespectful kids who were trampling on history. His profile listed his location as Green Valley, the town right next to the Titan Missile Museum. The threads were starting to connect, but they were still circumstantial, ghosts of digital arguments. The team needed something tangible. They found it buried deep in the supplemental files of the original case, in a box of miscellaneous and disregarded tips. A junior detective, tasked with rereading every piece of paper, pulled out a single crumpled dispatch note. It was a log of an anonymous phone call received by the Sheriff's Department on July 3, 2004, 1 week before Ellis vanished. The caller, a local rancher, reported seeing an old rusted pickup truck making repeated nighttime trips out to the 571-7 site. He mentioned seeing a man loading what looked like heavy junk from the silo entrance. The dispatcher had logged the call, but no patrol was ever sent. At the bottom of the note, in faint, handwritten script, was the dispatcher's final entry. Caller states, "The man looked familiar. Thinks he's one of the old-timers who works at the Missile Museum." The tip was never followed up on. It was a whisper that had been ignored, a clue that had been buried not by a killer, but by clerical neglect. The original 2004 case file contained a potentially explosive lead, a series of interview notes detailing a bitter academic rivalry between Ellis and another graduate student named Alistair Finch. Their feud was public, waged in university seminars and the footnotes of obscure historical journals. Finch had accused Ellis of intellectual theft, of building his thesis on a foundation of borrowed ideas. For the cold case team, it was a classic, powerful motive. Professional jealousy curdled into murderous rage. Detective McCartney's investigators pursued this trail with diligence. They found that Dr. Alistair Finch was now a tenured professor at a university in Oregon, a respected figure in his field. The theory gained a sinister appeal. A man who had potentially killed for his career and then spent 15 years successfully building that very career. They cross-referenced travel records, and discovered Finch had been in Tucson during the summer of 2004. For a few tense days, it seemed the silhouette in the photograph might belong to one of academia's rising stars. McCartney and another detective flew to Oregon to interview Finch. In a sterile, book-lined office, he was initially defensive, then weary. He admitted to the feud, calling it a product of youthful arrogance on both their parts. He described Ellis as brilliant but abrasive. As the detectives pressed him on his whereabouts on July 10, 2004, a look of dawning comprehension crossed his face. He leaned back, opened a desk drawer, and produced a leather-bound academic planner. He flipped through the pages, his finger landing on a specific week. On July 10, 2004, Alistair Finch had not been anywhere near the Arizona desert. He had been the keynote speaker at the annual Cold War History Symposium in Denver, Colorado. His alibi was ironclad, supported by flight manifests, hotel receipts, and the conference's own published proceedings. The theory, so promising just hours before, evaporated under the fluorescent lights of his office. The lead was dead. But as the detectives were packing their briefcases, Finch stopped them. He said the interview had dredged up a strange and unsettling memory from that time. He recalled attending a small local conference in Tucson a few months before Ellis vanished. After his presentation, he was confronted by a man, a museum caretaker, who got inches from his face and accused him of treading on his territory. The man was agitated, his eyes burning with a proprietary fury. He warned Finch to stay away from the decommissioned silos, calling them his history. The professor said he would never forget the man's name because it was so unusual. The name was Wallace Breen. The name was Wallace Breen. Pima County employment records confirmed he had worked as a low-level caretaker and tour guide at the Titan Missile Museum from 1998 until his retirement in 2012. He was a known quantity in the small circle of Cold War enthusiasts, an eccentric fixture regarded with a mix of pity and annoyance. He was a man hiding in plain sight, his simmering resentment dismissed as harmless crank behavior. But now, all the disparate threads of the investigation, the possessive forum posts, the anonymous tip about salvaging, the threat against Professor Finch were pulling tight, and Wallace Breen was at the center. Detective McCartney revisited Ellis's academic notes. In a folder marked 5717 pre-survey, she found a paper he had written on the unique materials used in Titan II construction. He had highlighted a specific section on beryllium copper alloys, noting their high scrap value and the increasing problem of illegal salvaging from decommissioned military sites. Ellis hadn't been just a historian. He was a conscientious one. He wasn't there to steal from Breen. He was there to document the very context of Breen's crime. The anonymous tip from 2004 mentioned heavy junk. The beryllium copper components in a Titan silo were incredibly dense and valuable. The question was no longer just who killed Ellis, but where did the metal go? The search shifted from historical archives to financial records, focusing on scrap metal dealers operating near Tucson in the mid-2000s. They got a hit. A man named Frank Miller, whose now defunct business had a history of EPA violations for handling hazardous materials without a permit. They found Miller living in a dusty retirement community in Mesa. At first, he claimed he remembered nothing. His memory was a fortress of denial. But McCartney didn't need his confession. She needed his records. Faced with the threat of federal charges for illegal trafficking in hazardous military-grade scrap, charges with no statute of limitations, Miller's memory underwent a miraculous recovery. He led the detectives to a locked footlocker in his garage. Inside, beneath layers of yellowed newspapers, were his old business ledgers. He ran his finger down a page from the summer of 2004, a meticulous, handwritten record of his illegal enterprise. And there it was. The evidence that doesn't lie. The entry was dated July 12, 2004, 2 days after Ellis disappeared. It recorded a cash transaction of several $1,000s. The client's name was listed as W. Breen. And in the column for materials, Miller had written 2 letters and a word: BQ scrap. All the pieces fell into place. The photo, the paranoia, the secret nighttime trips, the academic rivalry, it was all a sideshow. The motive in the end was brutally simple. It wasn't about protecting history, it was about protecting a profitable, illicit business. Ellis had stumbled not into a historical monument, but into a private gold mine, and its self-appointed guardian had killed him for it. Based on Wallace Breen's rambling confession and the forensic evidence, Detective McCartney's team was able to reconstruct the events of July 10, 2004, with chilling clarity. The meeting was not planned. It was a collision of two worlds in the dark. Ellis, the meticulous historian, descended into the silo, his headlamp cutting a clean beam through the gloom as he documented the decay. Deeper inside, Breen, the self-appointed gatekeeper, was at work, using a heavy pry bar to loosen valuable beryllium copper fittings from a junction box. When Ellis's light fell upon him, Breen saw not a student, but a witness. The confrontation began with paranoid accusations. Breen, his voice echoing in the concrete cylinder, called Ellis a vulture and a thief, demanding to know who sent him. Ellis, likely confused but not yet terrified, would have tried to explain his academic purpose, showing his university credentials. But to Breen, this was proof of a conspiracy. This outsider was here to expose his secret, to steal what he considered his own. The pry bar, a tool of his illicit trade moments before, was no longer just a tool. It was a weapon in his hand. The situation escalated. Ellis, realizing he was trapped underground with an unstable and armed man, began to retreat. He scrambled down a service ladder to a lower gantry, seeking distance, hoping to de-escalate. Breen followed. The silo, a place of historical study for Ellis, transformed into a vertical maze with no exit. Every echo, every scrape of Breen's boots on the metal rungs above would have amplified the terror. There was nowhere to run. Finally, Ellis reached a platform just above the dark water line. He was cornered. Above him, Breen appeared on a higher ledge, a dark silhouette against the distant circle of daylight. In that final moment, Ellis did the only thing his training had ever prepared him for. He raised his camera. It was an act of documentation, an instinct to capture the truth. The flash fired, a single burst of light capturing his killer's form. Breen, enraged by the act, lunged downward. There was the sharp, percussive clang of the pry bar, striking not Ellis, but the steel railing he was clinging to. The impact sent a shockwave through the metal. A hand slipped. There was a single sharp intake of breath, followed by a brief, weightless moment in the air. The silence of the silo was shattered by one final sound, a violent splash as Ellis's body hit the water below. He was gone. The dark, debris-filled water swallowed him, pulling him down into the wreckage. Breen watched from above as the ripples subsided, leaving the surface as still and black as before. He had not just killed a man, he had fed him to the tomb. There was no need for an elaborate cover-up. The silo was the perfect accomplice. Breen simply gathered his tools and the salvaged metal he had come for. He climbed back into the sunlight, pulled the heavy steel hatch shut, and drove away. 2 days later, he walked into Frank Miller's scrapyard and sold the alloys, the physical motive for the murder, for a few $1,000s in cash. For 15 years, the only witness to the crime was a single digital photograph, trapped in a waterproof case, waiting at the bottom of a concrete grave. Armed with the ledger and Frank Miller's testimony, Detective McCartney secured a warrant for Wallace Breen's property. They found him in a dilapidated trailer home, a man in his late 70s who had become a relic himself, surrounded by piles of decaying military artifacts. In a rusted shed out back, leaning against a wall, was a pry bar. Its dimensions, its unique wear patterns, and a small, distinctive notch near the head were a perfect match for the object seen in the enhanced blow-up of image 238. The past and the present had converged on a single piece of oxidized steel. During interrogation, Wallace Breen did not deny it. He confessed, but his confession was not an admission of guilt. It was a long, rambling monologue of paranoid justification. He painted Ellis as a government stooge, a vulture sent to steal his history and expose his operation. In his telling, the act was not murder, it was self-defense. It was the righteous act of a guardian protecting his sacred ground. He was arrested and charged with first-degree murder. The legal process, however, would be denied its final act. 3 weeks after his arrest, before a trial date could even be set, Wallace Breen was found unresponsive in his cell at the Pima County Jail. The cause of death was a massive coronary event. Justice, in its strictest sense, had arrived, but it was clinical and silent, delivered not by a jury, but by a failing heart. The man who had hidden his crime in a concrete silo would take the full story of his rage with him to the grave. Frank Miller, the scrap dealer whose silence had been bought for the price of a few $1,000s in illicit profit, accepted a plea deal. In exchange for his full cooperation and testimony, he pleaded guilty to lesser federal charges and received a lengthy probation. He never served a day in prison. For Ellis's family, the resolution was a complex and hollow victory. After 15 years of torturous uncertainty, they finally had an answer. They knew who had killed their son and why. But the truth did not erase the years of waiting. In a quiet statement to the press, Ellis's elderly father said that while they were grateful to the investigators, the discovery was like opening a wound they had spent a decade and a half trying to close. The verdict had been delivered, but the healing could not truly begin. Today, if you travel to the coordinates of Titan II missile silo 571-7, you will find nothing. After the investigation concluded, as part of the state-mandated environmental cleanup, the entire 146-foot shaft was filled with industrial concrete. The entrance was then buried under tons of compacted earth. The silo, once a weapon of mass destruction and then a murderer's accomplice, is now a solid, inert column of stone. A small bronze plaque, level with the ground, is the only sign that anything ever existed here. It marks the site as both a historical monument and a tomb. The legacy of Wallace Breen died with him, a footnote in a county court docket. His collection of military artifacts was auctioned off as scrap, the same fate as the metal he killed to protect. Ellis's legacy, however, endured. His research notes and his final chilling photographs were posthumously compiled by his university. The resulting book, The Concrete Ghosts, is now considered a foundational text in the study of Cold War architecture, a testament to a passion that sought to illuminate the past, not possess it. The great irony of the silo is that it was built to house the ultimate expression of global conflict, a weapon capable of ending civilizations. But in its long, silent life, it was never used for war. Instead, it became the stage for a crime born of something far smaller and more common: greed, jealousy, and the pathetic rage of one man. The concrete ghost of the Cold War did not hide a nuclear secret. It hid a human one. In the end, it all comes back to a single image: a desperate, accidental flash of light in a place of absolute darkness. It was the last thing Ellis ever did, and the one thing that ensured the truth would not be buried with him. The silence that now blankets that patch of the Arizona desert is absolute, but it is a different kind of silence than the one that reigned for 15 years. It is no longer the silence of a secret being kept. It is the silence of a story that has finally been told.